13. October 1958. Tagebau Muro, near Senftenberg, Bezirk Cottbus, German Democratic Republic. A miner named Karl P. pins a medal to his jacket and writes one line in a small notebook he keeps in his lunch pail. They told my father he dug for the Führer's victory, he writes. They tell me I dig for socialism. The dust in our lungs does not change ideology. The photograph shows him at noon, standing on the spoil bank, coat off, helmet tucked under his arm. You can see the brown haze of lignite dust behind him. In neat block letters beneath the image, someone has written, Hero of Socialist Labor, 1958. His face is unshaved. His eyes look away from the lens. The medal is real. The notebook was private. Karl was born in 1928. He learned to count in a schoolroom with a portrait of Hindenburg on one wall and then Hitler on the next. He learned to breathe coal dust in the Lausitz, where brown coal lay close to the surface and the landscape could be peeled open by a machine. His father dug coal under the Third Reich. Karl dug coal for the Soviet zone and then the GDR. One man's life across two regimes powered by the same fuel. The war ends, and another war starts, the war after the war. It runs through ration books, forms, and the choices that can be written down in a notebook and those that cannot. Streets with their fronts blown off. Brick and timber spilling into courtyards. Women with scarves knotted under their chins, the Trümmerfrauen hauling rubble into piles. The smell of damp plaster dust mixed with the reek of burst sewage lines. A city official writes in an occupation report that 30% of Senftenberg's housing stock is damaged or destroyed. The figure is neat on paper. It is chaos in the rooms behind it. Curfew comes at dusk. Red Army patrols move in pairs. There is fear in the stairwells when boots pause on the landing. The record in a Soviet Kommandatura logbook lists arrests for looting, for Nazi activity, for violating the curfew. Some names are German, some are Ukrainian and Polish, the forced laborers who have not yet found their way home. Violence flickers, then recedes, then flickers again. Family members are missing. Karl's father, Hans, a miner turned conscript, has not returned from the Eastern Front. A Feldpost letter dated January 1945 is the last trace. His mother spreads it on the kitchen table and presses her hand flat on the page. The neighbors whisper that Hans was seen near Poznań. The neighbors also whisper that men are coming back from the east on foot, gaunt and silent. Most do not come back. The mathematics of food is unforgiving. In the winter of 1946-47, the hunger winter, a miner's ration is supposed to be higher. Heavy laborers are allocated extra calories. The vouchers are paper. The shelves are bare. People chew raw potatoes and freeze them to make them last, then boil them, then mash them with the water they cooked in. They slice the bread thin and dry, the thin slices into zwieback. The British zone reports average daily intake at 1,000 to 1,500 calories. In the Soviet zone, Allied intelligence summaries argue the figures are worse. Smokestacks stand idle. Brown coal, too wet and low in energy, smolders and smokes. Cigarettes become currency. Coffee replacement is brewed from barley. The black market hums at night in railway sidings and on corners where heavy coats are swapped for tins of lard. A watch is worth meat, flour, and a half-day's work. Swap shop, Bahnhof, appears in a denazification file as a location of suspicion, as if hunger were itself a kind of guilt. Women clear masonry. Children comb through ash heaps for nails that can be straightened and reused. Trümmerfrauen work crews are organized by street. The mathematics of salvage is simple. A woman's back equates to one brick wall moved 1 meter in one morning. The rest is repetition. An American occupation report written about Berlin counts thousands of cubic meters of rubble hauled by hand. It reads like a ledger. The women carry a city on their backs. Denazification begins on paper. The Spruchkammer system in the western zones produces 5 categories for the defeated: Hauptschuldig, belastet, minderbelastet, mitläufer, entlastet. Major offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. One layer of order in an avalanche of improvisation. People explain themselves in the passive voice. I was obliged to join the party. I simply followed my superior's directives. They were party members because someone else had insisted. They were bystanders because no one had asked. They were victims because bombs fell. In the Soviet zone, the categories are different. SMAD Order Number 200 establishes the rule for community life. Nazis and war criminals are removed from office. Factories are seized as reparations. We are not guilty. The system is guilty, and we will build a new one, an SED pamphlet declares, reprinted later in Bundesarchiv records. The process is swift, punitive, and then pragmatic. A plant with no engineer cannot run. A mine with no foreman collapses. It is the same arithmetic of need across zones. Skilled men who were Nazis become skilled men who are necessary. Names reappear in offices under new titles. The mathematics of guilt is clipped and bureaucratic. Out of the millions who fill out forms, only a small fraction are punished. In the US zone, almost 3.6 million cases moved across Spruchkammer desks. Most are classified Mitläufer. Fines, probation, labor, judges write of moral failing, then hand out light penalties. The hunger and the Cold War are stronger than the categories. The system bends towards stability. Karl's mother fills out her form for the local Personenauschkas in 1945. She writes, no party membership. She writes husband at the front. She writes son at school. She lists her occupation as homemaker, then crosses it out and writes kitchen worker at pit canteen. The man at the desk nods. He stamps her paper. He hands her a new pass. She holds it like a bar of soap, slippery and vital. The displaced arrive in the Lausitz in waves. 12 to 14 million Germans are expelled from the east in the largest forced migration in modern Europe. They come with stories and with little else. They come for space that does not exist. Germans from East Prussia and Silesia become Umsiedler, settlers in a landscape that is already settled. The arithmetic of rooms is bitter. A municipal housing registrar's sheet for Senftenberg lists a 2-room flat, 4 occupants, 1 additional placement. That additional person is a Silesian widow with a daughter. Karl sleeps in the kitchen on a straw mattress for a year. The widow coughs at night with a tight, dry sound. The daughter is 5 and has a scar over one eyebrow. She tells the story so often it becomes a chant. Horse shot, barn burned. The woman does not tell stories. She boils beet tops for soup and stares at the wall. Tension rises. Locals resent newcomers who claim bread that was already rationed, jobs that were already claimed. They complain that our rooms are warm. A note in a block warden's notebook reads, "They don't know what we suffered in the air raids." The sentence is underlined twice in blue. The Silesian woman says nothing. She lost a husband on the Baltic roads under Soviet strafing. No one asks. The past is contended like a piece of furniture. Contact with victims is uneasy. Displaced persons camps exist at the edges of German towns. Liminal spaces full of people who have no reason to trust the people around them. Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, French captives, Italians, stateless survivors. A DP camp appears in an Allied map with a circle and a code. The people inside are numbers in a table. They are also the man with the scar notched into his cheek, who sits on a bench and smokes and watches the road. For Karl, the sight of them is in fragments. A column of men walking past the fence at the rail yard, Red Cross tags pinned to their shirts. A rumor that a train car full of people passed through at night. The two men slipped off under the wheels and were dragged to the police station. An older man, his face a ledger of injuries, answers a boy who asks, "Where were you?" with one word, Buchenwald. The boy repeats the strange syllables but does not ask what they mean. His mother pulls him away and later slacks him on the hand for talking to strangers. There is, in the early months, a flash of recognition. Karl works one day near the wire fence where forced laborers are assembled for transport. He hears Polish and Ukrainian. He recognizes the same wooden clogs they wore when they worked at the edge of the mine under German foremen in 1944. It is an echo across a ditch. He carries a coil of rope past the wire and keeps his eyes down. In his denazification file years later, he will write, "No personal responsibility, only work at pit. It is not a lie. It is not the whole truth." Occupation reports compiled by American officers note that Germans profess ignorance of crimes committed in their vicinity. Soviet proclamations speak of fascism as something that can be amputated. The mathematics of denial is tidy in prose and messy in practice. People recruit their own suffering to stand guard at the door of memory. We were bombed. We starved. We had no shoes. All true, none sufficient. The coal keeps the towns alive. Lignite is the fuel of scarcity. It is the lifeblood of an economy that has nothing else to give. Open-cast mining scars, the Lausitz into moonscapes of black ponds and white spoil heaps. Entire villages are moved on rails. The mines eat the land in straight lines. Karl's apprenticeship begins in 1946. He is 17. He is bony and eager and habitually silent. He learns to work the cable that drags the excavator's bucket. He learns to read the seams. He learns to watch the face of the spoil bank for the moment before it slips and slides. He learns to distinguish the sound of functional stress from the sound of failure. The mathematics of weight and friction become muscle memory. A bucket full with wet lignite weighs more than he can calculate, but less than the machine can lift. By 1948, the coal pits are Soviet-owned under the designation SAG, Sowjetische Aktiengesellschaft. The profits, such as they are, leave. Machines are dismantled and rolled away on flat cars. But the Soviets need coal for Berlin. They need it for power stations, for the trains that run heavy with reparations cargo. The miners are told they are the shock workers of the future. The men nod. They also bring their own shovels because there are not enough tools. On 13 October 1948, Adolf Hennecke, a miner in the Lugau-Urschnitz field, sets a production record by exceeding his quota by a factor of 3 in one shift. Newspapers cover it as a miracle. Neues Deutschland prints the headline in a font normally reserved for wars and elections. Hennecke, Vorbild des neuen Deutschland. The Hennecke movement begins, patterned on Soviet Stakhanovism, imported as a technique of management and a language of salvation. Exceed your piecework norm, and you will be honored. Fail, and you will be told you are dragging socialism by the ankles. The mathematics of quotas is moral arithmetic in new clothes. You are a number in a table. Are you above or below the line? Above means character. Below means sabotage. The pit bosses are instructed in the cadence of the new catechism. What do you earn? What do you deserve? How many % over? The numbers are the story. The numbers are the story. Karl is good at his job. He is compact, strong, cautious. He starts as a runner, becomes a... He watches an excavator chew the earth and works the swing. He keeps the bucket from biting into cables. He listens to the pit's rumble for changes. In 1951, he marries a woman from a village that will be dug away in 1964. In 1952, he has a son. In 1953, he watches the June uprising begin with murmurs near the canteen and end with tanks on the road and a line of men led away with their hands over their heads. 17 June 1953. Quotas go up by 10%. Workers in East Berlin walk off construction sites. In the mines, the phrase norm increase moves like a splinter in a finger. It irritates. It festers. In Karl's pit, men talk at lunch and lower their voices when a stranger walks past. Slogans appear in chalk on a wall of the washhouse and are gone by morning. A truck with a red flag on its bumper idles at the fence and idles and then leaves. The uprising is put down. Exemplary punishments follow. A Betriebspartie organization report labels 3 men provocateurs and lists their sentences. No one says their names out loud for a year. The mathematics of courage is not an equation Karl solves. He brings a sack of potatoes from a cousin and keeps his head down. In the West, Karl's cousin in Braunschweig writes about cartons stamped with stars and stripes, Marshall Plan shipments of milk powder and machines, currency reform in 1948 that turns Reichsmarks into Deutschemarks and paper into possibility. The Wirtschaftswunder lifts Western cities out of rubble and into neon. It feels like a rumor at first. Then Karl sees a West German magazine left by a truck driver at the pit gate. A Volkswagen plant advertises, in black and white photographs, the curve of a fender that the sun slides across like a hand. He shows it to his wife at night by the stove. She traces the outline of the car with a finger. He puts the magazine under the breadboard to flatten it for next time. He never talks about leaving. Before 1961, he could have, in theory. In practice, he is a man with a job that is indispensable to a state that keeps lists. The propaganda wraps around him like a second shirt. Neue Zeit runs a profile of his brigade once a month. The text is always the same. Young and old, bound together, the plan fulfilled, examples to us all. Edges are sanded away. Real accidents become instructive narratives. Broken hands are cautions. Lost fingers become warnings. Fines for safety violations are training. The photographs are all posed. The mud is wiped off boots for portraits. The dust is brushed off jackets. The lungs remain lined. Accidents are not slogans. The Unfallberichte, the accident reports, are little funerals written in numbers and monotone. 15. February 1954, 10:16 a.m. Bucket overfilled. Cable snapped. Victim, W, 34 years. 7 June 1956, 2005 p.m. Spoil bank collapse. 2 killed, 1 missing, presumed. The language is precise, as if facts could protect against grief. The notes on pages in the Betriebsarchive list. Preventive measures like talismans, check bolts, check cable, inspect spoil face, test slope angle. They cannot list, and do not list, the times men guess wrong. The dust is in everything. Lignite dust is soft and sticky and then sharp, the way memory is soft and then cuts. The men cough. The doctors call it Storblunge dust lung. The clinic in Senftenberg sees cases shuffle in with knees that feel older than the men who own them. The arithmetic of life is measured between breaths. Karl brings home a cough after every night shift. His son sleeps through it. His wife does not. In 1957, he spends a week in a sanatorium whose windows open onto a lake that is really an old pit filled with water. He comes back with a brochure that shows the GDR leading the world in workers' health. He keeps coughing. The medals come in their own arithmetic. There are enough to cover categories of effort and compliance. Aktivist der ersten Stunde, Verdienter Bergmann, National Prize for the Socialist Fatherland, Hero of Labor. They are wages that jingle, recognition that glints on a chest, counters in a game of prestige you play at work and leave off when you wash in the evening. The hero of socialist labor, the phrase printed under his photograph, is a translation of a Soviet myth into German rhythm. It is an answer to a question he does not ask out loud. He writes more down in the notebook because there are sentences that would be dangerous out loud. We warmed the city that left our village to the diggers, he writes when the expropriation notices are posted on the church door. What we pull from the ground will bury us, he writes when the spoil bank takes the path where he taught his son to ride a bicycle. He leaves the notebook in his pail under his spare gloves. When his shift ends, it smells like sweat and tobacco when he opens it. The school books in his son's satchel tell their own version. In the GDR, the Nazi past is presented as a story of evil from above and resistance from below. The workers were always against it. The elites were always for it. The Soviets liberated. His son repeats the phrase, anti-fascist democratic revolution, as if it were a song. In the West, Karl's sister, who crossed in 1950 and married a clerk in Hanover, sends her own son's schoolbooks that talk of dark times and bewilderment, and then pivot quickly to the heroism of the airlift and the orderliness of the miracle. Both versions have truths. Both versions have holes. The mathematics of memory works by subtraction. The public commemorations are neat. In East Germany, war anniversaries bring wreaths for victims of fascism. Names are read. The term compresses the categories that do not fit the story. Jews are named as Jüdische Bürger, but their names do not multiply across the mouths that speak. In West Germany, bombings and expulsions fill a larger space in public language than the crimes committed in German names. Karl reads about a meeting of expellees in Kassel in an article in a smuggled newspaper. He folds it twice and then again and puts it in his wallet. He looks at it once in a while like a photograph of a person he will never meet. There are documents for everything. Occupation reports count bricks and calories and statistics about morality. Denazification files count guilt like a currency exchange. Allied intelligence summaries test public mood the way you test coal for moisture. Bundesarchiv records keep track of meetings where slogans are hewn into sentences and sentences into laws. Oral histories gathered decades later catch the words that were never put on paper. I did not know exactly, but I knew, says a woman whose suitor came back from the police in 1942 with a different face. We had to live, says a man who kept 2 ration cards under a floorboard. We had to work, writes Karl in his notebook, then scratches the word had and writes chose, then scratches chose, and writes nothing. 1958 feels like a hinge. The first 5-year plans are completed. The 7-year plan is announced. Karl's brigade hits 135% of plan 1 week and 83% the next. The numbers move like weather. He is named a Brigade of Socialist Work Team Leader. He gets a certificate, a handshake, a painted enamel badge. He also gets a new target. The certificate is framed in cheap wood and hung in the kitchen next to a calendar of lake views that are actually flooded pits. The glass fogs with steam when soup boils and clears when the window is opened, a crack in winter. His son is 10 in 1958. He asks why some of the men at the pit are missing fingers. Karl says, it was the bucket. He does not say it was the line between hunger and bread. He does not say it was the arithmetic of quotas. He does not say It was the accident of being born on this side of the line. On 13 August 1961, the Berlin Wall rises like an argument that is suddenly a building. That day, Karl is in the pit and hears it at lunch. The joke is that the wall is to keep imperialists out. No one laughs. The mathematics of escape becomes the mathematics of imprisonment in one night. Work is the constant. Work keeps him alive and breaks him down. He is promoted to foreman in 1964, a man who does not sit at a desk but has a clipboard. He takes a pencil into the pit. He writes men's names and the hours they work next to them. He writes numbers that say whether a man is a good socialist or not. He writes in his notebook at night that a piecework line written in a ledger is not a man. The longer arc of his life carries him from one clothing of ideology to another with the same dust in his lungs. His father had been told he was fueling a 1,000-year Reich. The SED tells him he is lighting the furnaces of a classless future. He believes and does not believe. He works in any case. In 1972, he sits through a meeting about environmental stewardship. The slides show a model settlement on a lake with neat lawns. He goes home past the black water of a Kippensee, a spoil pond, and checks the rope on the neighbor's yard that he uses to keep children from wandering down into the reeds where people have drowned. He coughs and spits grit into the grass. He retires in 1983 with a watch, letters of thanks, and a lung capacity that is a percentage of what it was. The plant doctor writes a number in a box. He knows that number will not get him a second watch. His wife dies in 1987 after a short illness. He carries her framed photograph in a plastic bag to the office to change the name on a form. In 1989, the wall cracks. News flows. Television shows images that seem impossible and then dull with repetition. People who left return to visit. A man from Braunschweig walks Karl around a supermarket where apples are stacked like a stadium roof. He keeps looking up. He does not have a bag. He keeps his hands in his jacket pockets. The files open. The Stasi kept folders on men like him with layers of unspectacular suspicion. He requests his file and reads it sitting at the same kitchen table where his mother once pressed a Feldpost letter flat. The report calls him reliable with reservations. It lists the meetings he missed and the things he said at a work coffee. He reads his own sentences through the eyes of someone else's pencil. It feels like stepping into a photograph and finding you had always been standing just off to the side. We know the numbers. We can assemble them into a portrait with lines as exact as a survey map. We know that in 1945 there were 3 ration cards in his house. We know the calories those cards promised and what they delivered. We know the size of the bucket of the excavator he operated and the slope angles at which spoil banks fail. We know the number of men killed in his pit between 1946 and 1971. We know that his brigade hit 100% of plan 32 times and failed 14. We know that in 1953 he did not go with the men to the square. We know that he took a medal in 1958 and wrote a line that would have cost him his job if he had said it to the wrong person. We know that the men around him shifted the story of their pasts, the way you shift weight on a moving platform, just a follower. It was the times, it was the order. We know that denazification created patterns and exceptions, punished some, and placed others back behind desks. We know that the expulsions brought millions of mouths to feed and stories to absorb that sometimes bounced off hard surfaces. We know that German contact with the victims of German crimes was close enough to touch and slippery enough to slide away from. We know that memory is an economy, and that economies have shortages and surpluses that are distributed not by fairness, but by force. The economics of recovery sits in ships and charts. The Marshall Plan boats that docked in Bremen with bags of grain and boxes of machines, the reparations ships that left the East with lathes and locomotives on their decks. The arithmetic of the Cold War comes as percentages of plan, fulfilled and tank divisions on maps and radios that defer to Moscow. Karl stands on a spoil bank and looks at a map of a village that will be erased by 1972 and thinks of it as the cost of heat in a winter. Age brings more papers. Pension forms in triplicate. A letter from a man who says he is writing an oral history and wants to record his memories. He says yes. He speaks in short sentences and then, when the tape recorder is off, adds something he doesn't want on tape. The interviewer writes it down anyway and files it in a folder labeled confidential until subject's death. The interviewer is slow, careful, and hungry for the thing that makes stories more than patterns. He thinks he finds it when Karl says, "We cannot breathe in ideology. We breathe dust." He does not know that he is repeating a line written 3 decades earlier in a notebook that Karl has kept behind the gas meter. He lives in a small modernization of a mining settlement with a neat hedge and a satellite dish. He likes the news now because it speaks quickly and keeps moving. He drinks black coffee and eats bread with lard. He coughs the dust up and swallows it back down. He keeps a drawer of papers by his bed. They are his own archive. A ration card with the corners rounded off by his mother's thumb. A Spruchkammer form stamped with a Soviet eagle where a German eagle used to be. A photograph of himself with a medal in 1958. A letter from his sister with a coupon for coffee. A page from his son's schoolbook with a sentence about anti-fascist struggle underlined twice. His Stasi file copy with a margin note in which someone wrote politically immature. He reads the word immature and laughs once. He puts the file back in the drawer. In 2000, he writes one more line in his notebook. "No one ever asked me what my father's lungs felt like." He draws a small square after the sentence as if to box it in. He leaves the notebook open on the kitchen table where the light catches the indentations of words pressed into paper like seams in rock. He is 80 when he speaks at the opening of a museum made in a relocated church, a small place that tries to hold the story of villages that were eaten by the pit. He does not talk about ideology. He talks about pressure, about weight and taking it, about a slope that holds until it does not. He pauses and breathes carefully between sentences like a man going uphill. A historian in the front row thinks in terms of systems and incentives and states. He files Karl into a subchapter in his mind and then, later, writes a paragraph that begins, "For workers like K, born in the late Weimar Republic, fascism and socialism were 2 surface treatments on a structure built of work." He deletes and adds until the sentence sits flat on the page. He leaves out the cough and the smell, because the page does not hold smells. Karl's son leaves the region for a job in a glass factory in the West. He takes with him a set of negotiated silences. He knows his father was a foreman. He knows his grandfather vanished into a winter in Poland or Belarus. He knows his grandmother's hands were always red and chapped. He knows the sound of the pit at night, and that it still plays in his ears when he is away. He knows he never asked his father who he had been before he was a father. Karl, at the end, puts his papers in order. He writes his name on the back of the medal certificate. He writes "keep" on the back of the photograph. He writes "throw away" on a meeting notice from 1976. He flips through the notebook and lingers on the first page of 1958, then on the last page of 2000. He puts the notebook under the stack of ration cards and closes the drawer. We could draw his life as a line beneath 2 regimes. We could mark the points of historical change: 1945, 1948, 1953, 1961, 1989. We could draw the slope of the spoil bank and the slope of his lungs declining and draw a comparison. The mathematics would be clean and the life would not. The last sentence he writes in the notebook is a coda, a return to the first measure. It is for himself. It is an ending that refuses to decide for you. Someone once said to me that we went from brown uniforms to brown coal, he writes. I told him that we were already wearing the dust. He pauses. He adds one more line. The front line for me ran through mine returns and ration books and denazification forms and party reports and accident ledgers, and it still runs through this paper now. He closes the book and leaves it on the table, a small stack of memory and breath, because for Karl the front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, not across a battlefield.